morning, and there's been a lot going on so far that we've looked at. Now we are at chapter 6. We've looked at how sin is this idea of exchanging what we know, exchanging God's love, exchanging relationship, exchanging faith in God for something else, for something less. And from that one exchange comes so much heartbreak and separation and pain. That this mighty disease of just giving up that one choosing of the else causes so much. We look at Paul's place. We've looked at Paul's place as a Pharisee. How as a Pharisee he had great zeal to bring the nations to God. The idea of that Abraham's covenant, that through Abraham all the world would be blessed. And Paul has great zeal for that. And then how on the road to Damascus, the truth about God came into focus in a different way for Paul. And he kept that same zeal, he kept that same idea of bringing blessing to the Gentiles at his heart and in his mission. But now that he's appealing to the Gentiles, that they by the same faith might achieve salvation, we looked at how that might be troubling to those that are already on the inside. As you open the doors wide, those on the inside sometimes wonder what it's all about. We've been working towards righteousness on the inside. How does this thing called grace work for us? And then Paul went back to the beginning, and he looked at how with Abraham there was righteousness, and there was righteousness that happened before the law was ever given to Moses. And that this idea of righteousness transcended the law, and it was based in the idea that Abraham had great faith. And that's brought us to the last few weeks where we've been looking at sin and life and death, and how in this new resurrection light, these ideas, these states of being, these seeming powers, and our relationships to them have completely changed. And like when Paul looked back at Abraham to see how faith makes righteousness before the law, he shows also with Adam last week that there was sin before there was law, showing that sin is more than just violations from some list of rules, but instead all that which leads to death. All that which leads to death. Being bound to death. Being bound to that choice of something other than God. All of those things that are conditioned by death to squash and squeeze the very life out of us. But that Jesus and his resurrection does more than just beats the empty tomb, the tomb and the cross. It does more than that, but it beats death itself and allows for a new being of life. Now today he takes this a step further, looking at the relationship between grace and sin and life. This is chapter 6. Let's see what Paul does with this. What shall we say then? Shall we go on sinning that grace may increase? By no means. We are those who have died to sin. How can we live in it any longer? Or don't you know that all of us who were baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death? We were therefore buried with him through baptism into death, in order that just as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, we too live a new life. For if we have been united with him in a death like his, we will certainly also be united with him in a resurrection like his. For we know that our old self was crucified with him so that the body ruled by sin might be done away with, that we should no longer be slaves to sin. Because anyone who has died has been set free from sin. Now if we died with Christ, we believe that we will also live with him. For we know that since Christ was raised from the dead, he cannot die again. Death no longer has mastery over him. The death he died to sin once for all. But the life he lives to God. In the same way, count yourselves dead to sin, but alive to God in Christ Jesus. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Now, look at the sections that he's dealing with here. He says, we have died to sin. How can then we live sin any longer? That we are baptized into Christ, into death, into his death. That baptism is more than the sprinkle, more than the submerging, but actually connecting us to his death. And that we then are buried with him into that death. And just as he was raised out of that death, so too we have new life. United in death and life. Old self crucified with him. That body that was ruled by sin is done away with. No longer are we slaves. Anyone who has died has been set free. Died with Christ. Also, we then live to Christ. Live with him. Christ raised from the dead. Death no longer has any mastery. The death he died to sin once and for all. But the life he lives to God. In the same way, he says, count yourself dead to sin. Now this is transformational language. This is not just keep on keeping on. This is transformational, life-changing language. But I skipped the first line, which perhaps I think is the most important. It gives focus to this section. It's the general question, what shall we say then? Shall we go on sinning so that grace may increase? By no means, he says. He parallels this statement again at verse 15, and again emphatically says, again, by no means. What then? Shall we sin because we are not under the law but grace? Again, by no means. What do you take from this? How does this strike you? What is Paul getting at? Now, before we go too far afield, I want to take a look at the Old Testament lesson. This comes from Deuteronomy, which means literally the second law. It's the last testament of Moses. This is Moses and his parting advice to his people. And this may possibly be the most important section in all of the Old Testament to a Jewish audience. This is what is at the center of their faith. Deuteronomy 6. These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in the land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. The word of the Lord. Now look at verse 3 in this. Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey. Do this so that. Do this so. It's hard not to think of this phrase as systematic thinking. If I do this simple thing, blessings will flow. If I remind myself constantly that the Lord God is one, if I write it on my lamppost, if I put it in front of me everywhere I can see, if I bind myself with phylactery so that all I see is that, then things may go well with me in the future. It's hard not to think of this as systematic. If I do this, blessings are going to flow. Much, if not all, of ancient religion has that overtone. If I do things, they're going to benefit me, right? If I take a virgin and I take her and throw her into the volcano, I'm good. That volcano is not going to erupt for a while. If I burn this sacrifice, then the winds will be good and my ships will make it to the other side. And then my army will reach the shores of Troy without bound. If I do this. Now, it was more than sacrificing an animal, and that was sacrificing his daughter. But, you see the idea. If I do this, then that. It would make perfect sense for us to think that religion is all about working things out for our own benefit. It's natural. So it would make perfect sense then also to think that grace is for my benefit, and grace becomes as a result of my sin. Why not sin then so that grace is more? Sin is bad, but grace is greater than sin. So why don't I just keep sinning so that there's this more and more and more grace? It's all for my benefit anyway. Why not keep sinning if we are living under this new system of grace where everything has been given to us and we can just go on? The system is in place. God has put the system in place, and I am simply benefiting from living under the rules of that system. Seems logical. Why then does Paul say, by no means? Twice. It's actually said it a couple of times in Romans. By no means. This logic, by no means. When I was at Blue Ridge, there was this guy that had been there for years. And he had been, he's at boarding schools, they have these guys called schoolmen. And I'd always aspired to be a schoolman myself, of someone who is so connected to the school and what it means and how it operates that the students that you have, they see how much dedication that you have to the school, and they read that as how much dedication. It's the idea of being a leader, and that's what this guy was. He was a dean of students at one point. He was a dean of admissions at one point. He was assistant headmaster at one point. And all through this whole process, he was a football coach and led a drama and was the head of the drama program. He had a lot of bases covered. And he had great respect. But when I started there, he had just retired. And he had retired because his health was fading fast. And you could just see his body just kind of falling apart. And his wife was still teaching there, so he was always really still connected. And he was still trying to be a part of the drama program, and he was still a big part of the school. But at one point, when we knew that it was about to be over, he went up to the mic in a weird moment in assembly. He went up to the microphone, and he gives this last speech, almost like Moses, where he's giving this last speech. And he makes all these points about respect and love and caring for your teachers and doing what's right and all that. And at the last point, he comes real close to the microphone like this, pulls up his finger, and he says, "And stay out of the system." And then walked off. Stay out of the system. Why did he say that? What did he mean by that? We look at our world. that go on. The sun, the orbit of all things around the sun, the seasons, days like clockwork, the darkness following the light, and vice versa. We see patterns of life and death. We see a food chain. We see decomposition of life in fertilizer, life growing out of life. Our bodies even work in a system. We have a digestive system. We have a respiratory system. We have a reproductive system. We have all of these different systems. Each organ within our body has a specific purpose and function. And they all work together accordingly and perfectly. So it's no wonder, with all of these systems around us, that we think systematically. Think about businesses. Think about politics. Think about our notions of order and things in order. How can we make this business run more efficiently? How can we make that church run more effectively? How can we better educate our kids? How can we better serve the government? How can the government find a new way of doing this? All of our solutions to problems are new systems. We study systems all the time, perfecting systems, streamlining systems. We study systems over here to make other systems over here work better. With all of this, why did that old man talking to these young men, giving his last bit of advice, why did he say to them, stay out of the system? And I am absolutely sure that none of them have a clue. Most of us adults were scratching our heads, what the old man thinking about? But there's something to what he was saying. What does science do? At one point, science is about studying the systems of the universe, to conform those systems, to conform life to those systems, to find out how best to order our life according to those natural systems. But at some point, that has morphed into changing those systems and manipulating those systems, not for us to conform to them, but for them to conform to us. That we alter systems to benefit life, supposedly. But that question of benefit is an interesting concept. Benefiting who? It's an interesting point that we have come to where the same folks lean on science to claim on one hand that gender is a social construct, a social construct. And then at the same time, out of the other corner of their mouth, claim that someone can be genetically transgender. Doesn't make sense. But claim that that's science on both sides of the same coin. So if we can manipulate something like that and call it science, where are we? Yes, the idea of who benefits is an interesting concept. Who benefits and how? How do you determine the benefit of a changed system? By the result, by the outcome, by the fruit, supposedly. But rarely is the cost ever analyzed, because the cost in a malleable system can always be put off to later. It can always be staved off to another time. It can always be shaved off and forgotten about. The crisis of 2008, the economic crisis of 2008, is a perfect example. We can just kick that problem down the curve and maybe it will never be a problem. Trillions and trillions of dollars of debt, shave off, stave off, kick it forward. Why does this happen? It all comes down to the idea of limited perspective and poor system analysis. there is this idea of unforeseen factors, because we think we've got the entire system set and how it works. And then we can change it around, but we forgot about this one little thing. I'll ask you a simple question. What is the purpose and function of the sun? Scientists might say that it has no purpose, it only has a function. Okay, fine. What is the function of the sun? Is it heat? Is it light? Is it holding planets in their orbit? What is it? Is it running solar-powered stations? If the purpose and function of the sun is light, how can God say, "Let there be light," before the sun exists? Light itself pre-exists the sun. That in itself should make us question a little bit about how much we know about the sun. It seems so obvious to us that the sun gives us light. But yet, is the sun just a surrogate, just a symbol, just a notion of what God's power is beyond that? Unless we're asking those questions, never ever will we understand a system completely. Unless our minds are open to beyond what is just at the surface, never will we understand any of those systems completely. Does that make you think differently about how the sun works? That there was light pre-existing to the sun? Does it defy that systematic logic? What is lessened when you don't ask that question? Less end, not lessen, but lessened. What is made smaller? The answer is the value of the sun. It takes the sun and it puts it in a box and says, light giver, and puts it over here and limits it down. And often that's what our systems do. We become a number, a name, a measurable value, fit or not fit. How do you function according to the system? That's your entire value. And we might extend that to people. What is that person's function? What is that child's function? What is that student's function? What is that worker in the factory's function? What is that voter's function? Are we merely cogs in the wheel? Are we merely numbers taking place, living together, but with nothing beyond just our value to perpetrating and perpetuating systems? I love football, and I was very excited that football is starting out, not that garbage NFL preseason stuff that doesn't mean anything. And I'm not one that's against the NFL. I think the NFL starts next week when the games actually start. But college football is an amazing thing. I coached high school football for 16 years. And I know that from both being a fan and being a coach, that true coaching, and I heard this quoted just the other day, true coaching adjusts its system to fit the talent. Joe Gibbs is the only coach to ever win 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks because he changed his system to fit what he had. The best year I ever had in coaching, the most fulfilling, wonderful year was 2012 for me. We started that year with 16 players because it's boarding school and our first game was before school even started. So we had those kids that came to camp. A couple of prefects had to go to an outing during our game. There was a freshman trip going on. There was all of this stuff going on that had nothing to do with football, but we took our 16 kids and we played. Now, if you take 16 and minus 11 from that, the sideline was really lonely. But that year was amazing because we won that game. 2 weeks later, we had 30 kids. We had these receivers that were amazing athletes. But one of them punched one of the other players in the middle of the game, and so he's not only kicked out of that game, but suspended for the next game. The other one wasn't real bright, and his grades were so bad that he was going to be ineligible for the next game. This was Monday, and I'm the offensive coordinator. I'm like, okay, we're going to run the ball. And so we changed and we devised an entire run scheme to be able to focus on what we had available. It turned out that those two players were clear. The appeal went through, and he wasn't suspended, and the kid got his grades up and he could play. We didn't need that, but we had it later on when we did need it. That year we were 7-0. We went to Liberty Christian Academy, which is connected to Liberty University. There's a lot of Baptist money up in there. And if you go to school, high school there, they will let you go to Liberty University for free. They could recruit anybody they wanted. The kid, Rashad Jennings, that was on Dancing with the Stars, went there. He was an NFL player too. Dancing with Stars, I guess, is what more important. We got beat 56-0. They scored a touchdown a minute for the first 7 minutes of that game. It was the most insane thing I've ever been a part of. Somehow we regrouped from that and won the state championship. The adversity, having to grow as human beings, having to grow as people, having to change each game to figure out what we had. If we came into that season thinking that that season was going to be like every other season that we had before, we would have been lost. Why did Frank DeAngelis, why did that old man stand on that stage and say, stay out of the system? Because it limits you. The system allows the system to define you instead of the other way around. One of my favorite quotes from T.S. Eliot is, they constantly try to escape from the darkness outside and within by dreaming of systems so perfect that no one will need to be good. Think about it. Think about how true that is. Systems in place so that individual character doesn't matter anymore. Because those individual character points can just be shaved off. We don't need them. But we do need them. That's what's really important. We do need them. So, true goodness flows from grace more than it ever did within the law. Because now all of a sudden, we're freed from the system to be able to go follow in the footsteps of Jesus. To be able to have that relationship with Jesus. We'll be able to go where he leadeth me. We are able to go wherever it is, not because we need to, not because we're trying to benefit ourselves, not but because we are trying to work the system to our favor, but because we've been set free to follow him. Set free for relationship. All of those old definitions about sin and death and this and that are gone. Follow Jesus. That's what matters. And remember what Paul said is the original problem of sin. Choosing something other than God. Choosing something other than Jesus. He's saying, come back to God. Come back and follow Jesus. Forget about all the rest of that stuff. It's killing you. It's death. Here's an invitation to life. So when the first thing that comes out of your mouth is, after he says you've been set free, oh, does that mean that I can sin and do whatever I want? It's like, you're missing the point. You're missing the point completely. By no means. Put that aside. Put those questions aside. Put those thoughts aside and follow Jesus. One of the troubles is that systems and the law is about minimums. What can I do to fit just above this threshold? What can I do to just get right up here so people can see me? Whereas grace and relationship are about maximums. And if the maximums are defined by Jesus and God, which is an infinite concept, that those maximums never exist. You just keep rising upward. A system puts you in a box. Grace allows you to rise beyond any limitations whatsoever. So I'm not going to tell you, like he did, to stay out of the system. I'm going to tell you to rise above the system. Rise above it. Because God has made it that way. And Jesus has invited us to do so. May it be so. Amen. May we stand together and say what it is that we believe, our confession of faith, the Apostles' Creed printed in the bulletin. Everybody stand.